The galaxy had a long list of dangerous prisoners. Warlords. Pirates. Artificial intelligences that had once tried to rewrite reality itself. But according to the official records of half the known star systems, the most dangerous prisoner currently alive was not a warlord. Not a machine. Not even a general. She was a fox-haired woman sitting calmly behind an energy barrier inside a maximum security cell. The Vulpine. Tall. Elegant. Orange gold fur across her ears and tail, silver armor restraints around her wrists, and eyes that glowed like someone had hidden twin stars inside them. The kind of eyes that studied every person in a room and already knew exactly how they would fail. 3 fleets had tried to capture her. 2 of those fleets no longer existed. The third one succeeded only because she eventually got bored of running. Now she sat inside the brig of an Imperial battlecruiser the size of a small city. The ship's metal corridors hummed with weapons systems, fighter squadrons, and enough firepower to erase a continent. And every guard on board had been warned about one very important thing. Do not talk to the prisoner. Do not stand too close to the prisoner. And under absolutely no circumstances should anyone be alone with the prisoner. Unfortunately, someone had already broken all 3 rules. The human guard leaned against the wall outside her cell like he had absolutely nothing better to do in the middle of a galactic warship transporting the most wanted being in the quadrant. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed? Helmet off. Arms folded. Expression calm enough to make the nearby alien soldiers uncomfortable. One of the reptilian officers stopped beside him and stared through the energy barrier at the Vulpine. She stared back. Slowly. Deliberately. The reptilian officer swallowed. "Why is the human assigned here?" he muttered. Another guard replied quietly. "Command said humans are resistant to psychological manipulation." The reptilian officer looked at the human again. "Is that true?" The human shrugged. "Honestly? No idea." Inside the cell, the Vulpine smiled slightly. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that usually appeared right before someone made a very bad decision. Her tail moved slowly behind her like it had its own sense of humor. She stepped closer to the energy barrier. The alien guards immediately stepped back. The human didn't. That was the first thing she noticed. Most beings avoided standing close to her. Either because of her reputation or because they knew how quickly she could move. But this human simply watched her like she was an interesting puzzle. "Human," she said softly. Her voice had a smooth confidence that made several guards suddenly find other parts of the corridor very interesting. The human tilted his head slightly. "Fox," one of the guards whispered urgently. "Do not engage the prisoner." The human didn't even look away from her. "Relax," he said. "We're just talking." The Vulpine studied him carefully. Most beings who spoke to her showed fear within the first 10 seconds. This one didn't. That made him interesting. "You don't seem nervous," she said. The human shrugged. "I've met worse." She raised an eyebrow. "Worse than me?" "Once dated someone from Earth," he replied casually. Several guards exchanged confused looks. The Vulpine tilted her head, amused. "Bold for someone standing outside my cell." The human smiled faintly. "Bold for someone inside it." Her eyes narrowed slightly with curiosity. Most soldiers tried to threaten her. Most commanders tried to interrogate her. But this human talked like he had accidentally walked into the wrong room and decided to stay anyway. She stepped closer to the barrier until only the thin blue glow separated them. "You know who I am?" she asked. "Sure." "And you're not afraid?" The human pretended to think about it. "Should I be?" Her tail flicked once. "You're alone in a room with the most dangerous woman in the galaxy." The human leaned casually against the wall again. "Yeah," he said. "Dangerous company can be fun." One of the guards coughed nervously. Another whispered, "He's going to get himself killed." Inside the cell, the Vulpine slowly circled him from the other side of the barrier. Studying. Analyzing. He followed her movement with his eyes but never tensed. "You're very confident," she said. The human shrugged again. Confidence is cheaper than fear. She stopped directly in front of him. You humans have strange instincts. Yeah, he replied. We get that a lot. Silence hung between them for a moment. Then she spoke again. You're not really a guard. It wasn't a question. The human smiled slightly. What gave it away? The part where you're not terrified. The guards nearby shifted nervously. One of them whispered into a communicator. Command, the prisoner is interacting with the human again. Static answered back. The human ignored them. The Vulpine leaned slightly closer to the barrier. Close enough that if the field dropped, the distance between them would disappear instantly. You didn't sneak onto this ship just to watch me, she said quietly. Did you? The human's smile widened just a little. Not exactly. Her eyes gleamed. Then why are you here? He opened his mouth to answer. And the entire cruiser suddenly trembled. A deep metallic vibration rolled through the hull like a distant thunderclap. Red lights flickered on across the corridor. A mechanical voice echoed through the ship. Battle alert! Battle alert! All personnel to combat stations. The alien guards immediately moved. Weapons activated. Orders shouted. Footsteps rushed through the corridors as the massive warship prepared for combat. Inside the cell, the Vulpine slowly turned her head toward the ceiling. Then back to the human. You planned something, she said. The human pushed himself off the wall and stretched like someone waking up from a nap. Maybe. Another tremor shook the ship. Far away, something exploded. The reptilian officer shouted into his communicator. Report! A panicked voice answered. Unidentified attackers! Multiple systems compromised. The Vulpine's eyes returned to the human. He looked far too calm. You seem very relaxed for someone trapped on a warship under attack, she said. He glanced toward the corridor lights flashing red. Honestly? Yes. I prefer my exits dramatic. Another explosion echoed somewhere deeper in the ship. The guards rushed past the brig, heading toward defensive positions. For the first time since the alarms began, the Vulpine noticed something strange. The human wasn't reacting like a soldier caught in a battle. He was reacting like someone who had been expecting this exact moment. Her gaze sharpened. You're enjoying this. The human gave a small shrug. Maybe a little. The ship shook again, harder this time. Metal groaned through the walls. The automated voice returned. Critical damage detected. All personnel remain at alert status. The Vulpine folded her arms slowly. You didn't answer my question. Which one? Why you're here. The human stepped closer to the barrier. Close enough that their reflections merged in the blue glow. His voice dropped just enough that the distant guards couldn't hear. Let's say, he said quietly, I had a delivery to make. Her tail moved slowly behind her. A delivery? Yeah. And what exactly are you delivering? The human looked directly into her glowing eyes. Opportunity. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then the ship shuddered violently as another explosion rolled through its massive structure. The lights flickered again. Somewhere far above them, sirens began to howl. The human glanced toward the corridor. Then back at her. You might want to stay close to me, he said casually. The Vulpine's ears tilted slightly. Why? The human's smile returned. Because in a few minutes, he said, things are going to explode. The alarms did not stop. If anything, they became louder. The red lights continued to pulse across the corridor like the ship itself had developed a heartbeat. Heavy footsteps thundered past the brig as soldiers rushed toward their battle stations, and the distant rumble of weapons echoed through the hull. Most of the guards who had been standing near the Vulpine's cell were gone now. War had a way of rearranging priorities. And suddenly the most dangerous prisoner in the galaxy had only one guard left. The human. He stood there calmly, watching the chaos unfold like someone observing bad weather through a window. Inside the cell, the Vulpine crossed her arms and leaned slightly against the energy barrier. You planned this, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was simple observation. The human tilted his head. That obvious? You're smiling during a battle. That's just my face. The ship shook again as something large detonated somewhere along the cruiser's outer hull. Metal groaned. The automated voice returned. Warning. Structural damage detected. Security teams deploy immediately. The Vulpine watched him carefully. Most beings panicked when warships started falling apart around them. This human looked like he was waiting for room service. You infiltrated this cruiser, she said slowly. Correct. And somehow an attack just happened to begin at the same moment you were assigned to guard my cell. Funny coincidence. Her tail flicked once. You're not very good at lying. Good, the human replied casually. Means I don't have to keep doing it. For a moment she studied him in silence. Then she laughed softly. The sound was surprisingly warm for someone responsible for destroying fleets. You humans really are strange. Thanks. That wasn't a compliment. Still counts. Another tremor rippled through the deck. This one stronger. Dust fell from a ventilation panel above them. Somewhere deeper in the cruiser, something large exploded. The Vulpine glanced toward the corridor, then back at him. You're sabotaging the ship. Partially. Partially? Well, the human said, stretching his shoulders slightly. Technically, I sabotaged it earlier. Her eyes narrowed with growing curiosity. How much earlier? About 6 hours. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. 6 hours? Yeah. You've been on this ship for 6 hours and no one noticed? The human shrugged. Humans have a talent for showing up where we're not supposed to be. The Vulpine stepped closer to the barrier again. So this attack isn't random? Nope. You arranged it. Sort of. She tilted her head. You destroyed an entire warship just to talk to me. The human chuckled. Relax. I destroy warships for lots of reasons. Her eyes gleamed with amusement. You're insane. Allegedly. The ship lurched violently again. Somewhere down the corridor, sparks burst from a damaged panel. The Vulpine glanced toward the ceiling as the automated voice spoke again. Critical system failures detected. Then she looked back at the human. You're not here to interrogate me. No. You're not here to kill me. Nope. Her tail swayed slowly behind her. So what exactly are you doing here? The human stepped closer to the barrier until the glowing field cast blue light across his face. I'm solving a problem. And what problem is that? The galaxy has a habit of locking up interesting people. The Vulpine raised an eyebrow. You consider me interesting? Oh, absolutely. She studied him for another moment. Then smirked slightly. I destroy governments. Impressive. I've escaped 14 prisons. Good cardio. I once hijacked an entire fleet using only a stolen shuttle. The human nodded. Efficient. Her smirk widened. And you still decided to break onto this ship and stand 2 steps away from me. He leaned casually against the wall again. Dangerous company builds character. One of the remaining security panels sparked loudly. The Vulpine glanced toward it. Then her eyes returned to the human. You're enjoying this far too much. Explosions improve the mood. The ship shuddered again, harder this time. A loud metallic boom echoed somewhere nearby. Then the automated voice spoke again. But this time the tone was different. Colder. More final. Emergency protocol activated. A pause. Then the words that changed everything. Self-destruct sequence initiated. For a moment the corridor fell completely silent. Even the distant sounds of battle seemed to fade behind the weight of those words. The Vulpine blinked once. Slowly. Then looked at the human. You did that. The human lifted a hand slightly. Technically the captain did. You forced the captain to do that. Details. Her eyes narrowed again. You sabotaged the cruiser so badly the commander would rather destroy his own ship than let it fall. That's one way to look at it. Another way? I prefer to call it encouragement. The ship trembled again as the countdown began. Self-destruct in 10 minutes. The Vulpine exhaled slowly. 10 minutes. Plenty of time. For what? The human glanced down the corridor. Then toward a sealed hatch further along the wall. Leaving. Her ears tilted slightly. You have an escape plan. Of course. She looked at him carefully. Then glanced around the corridor. Then back at him. Let me guess, she said. You planted explosives, sabotaged their systems, triggered their self-destruct. Correct. And now you plan to escape alone. The human smiled slightly. That was the original idea. Was? He pushed himself away from the wall and walked down the corridor toward the sealed hatch. The Vulpine followed his movement with her glowing eyes. Human, she said calmly. He stopped beside the hatch. Turned. And looked back at her. You're not leaving without me. The human chuckled. That confident? You broke onto a warship full of soldiers just to stand outside my cell. Her tail moved slowly. You didn't do all that just to walk away. The human studied her for a moment. Then tapped a panel beside the hatch. The door slid open with a quiet mechanical hiss. Inside was a small launch chamber. And at the center of the chamber sat a single escape pod. The Vulpine immediately noticed something. There was only one. She looked back at him. The human gestured casually toward the pod. Well, he said. Here's the situation. The ship shook again as the automated voice continued. Self-destruct in 8 minutes. The Vulpine stepped closer to the barrier. You're giving me that look again. What look? The one humans make right before doing something incredibly stupid. The human smiled. I prefer the word heroic. Those two words are often the same thing. He tapped another control panel beside her cell. The energy barrier flickered. Then shut off completely. For the first time since her capture, the Vulpine was no longer contained. She stepped out of the cell slowly. Gracefully. The alien restraints around her wrists fell away as the human unlocked them. The corridor lights flickered again. Self-destruct in 7 minutes. The Vulpine looked down the corridor. Then at the single escape pod waiting in the chamber. Then at the human. You're giving me the last escape pod. It wasn't a question. The human leaned casually against the wall again. Yep. Her eyes narrowed. And what exactly are you planning to do while this ship explodes? The human looked around the shaking corridor. Then back at her. And smiled. Honestly? Yes. I'm thinking of staying for the fireworks. The cruiser trembled again as another explosion rippled through its enormous frame. The red warning lights flashed faster now, painting the metal corridor in sharp pulses of crimson. The countdown voice continued calmly, almost politely. Self-destruct in 6 minutes. The Vulpine stood just outside the cell she had been trapped in only moments ago. The restraints were gone. The barrier was gone. Freedom was standing only a few steps away. And yet she didn't move toward the escape pod. Instead, she stared at the human. You're serious, she said slowly. The human leaned against the wall beside the open launch chamber like someone waiting for a delayed elevator. Usually. You're giving me the only escape pod on this ship. Correct. And you plan to stay here? Technically, yes. Her tail swayed slowly behind her. That's either very brave or very stupid. The human shrugged. Sometimes those look the same from the outside. The ship groaned again as structural supports somewhere deep inside the cruiser began to fail. The Vulpine walked past him and stepped into the small launch chamber. Her glowing eyes immediately scanned the pod. Compact. Minimal. Designed for emergency evacuation, not comfort. She turned back toward the human. You expect me to believe you sabotaged an entire warship and then forgot to save a seat for yourself? I didn't forget. Then explain. The human gestured toward the pod. After you? She didn't move. Instead, she folded her arms and leaned lightly against the frame of the hatch. You first. The human laughed quietly. You really don't trust anyone, do you? I've survived this long by assuming everyone is lying. Fair. The cruiser shook again. Sparks burst from a panel overhead and scattered across the floor. Self-destruct in 5 minutes. The Vulpine flicked one ear toward the ceiling. Then her gaze returned to him. You're too calm. I've been told that. You're standing inside a warship that is about to explode. Correct. And you're smiling. Explosions are exciting. She took a step closer. Close enough now that the faint scent of metal and ozone mixed with something sharper, something distinctly Vulpine. You're hiding something, she said. The human gave a small shrug. I hide lot of things. I noticed. She stepped into the escape pod and looked around its interior. Then she froze. Her ears tilted slowly upward. Human. Yeah? This pod is very small. Efficient design. There's only one seat. Space-saving engineering. She leaned out of the hatch and looked at him suspiciously. You didn't mention that. You didn't ask. Her tail flicked once. You expect me to sit in that tiny chair and launch alone while you stand here waiting to die? That was the plan. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly smiled. Liar. Before he could answer, she reached out, grabbed the front of his uniform, and pulled him forward. The movement was fast enough to surprise even him. A second later, the human stumbled into the escape pod beside her. He blinked. Well, he said. That's one way to board. The Vulpine sealed the hatch behind him with a quick press of the control panel. The pod's interior lights flickered on. Now the small space felt even smaller. The Vulpine looked around the cramped interior again. Then at him. You said this was the last pod. It is. And now we're both inside it. Also correct. She slowly sat in the single seat. The problem was immediately obvious. There was no second seat. The human looked at the empty space beside her. Then at the small control console. Then back at her. Well, he said casually. This is awkward. The Vulpine raised an eyebrow. You're the one who sabotaged a cruiser. Yeah, but I didn't design the furniture. The ship shook violently again. A loud metallic crack echoed through the hull. Self-destruct in 4 minutes. The Vulpine glanced at the timer on the console. Then back at him. Close the hatch lock. Already did. Good. She adjusted slightly in the seat. Then looked at the very limited space beside her. Then at him again. You're going to have to sit. Where exactly? She smirked slightly. You're the one who enjoys dangerous situations. The human sighed dramatically. Fair point. Carefully, he lowered himself into the narrow space beside her. The pod clearly had not been designed for 2 adult beings. Their shoulders pressed together immediately. Then their legs. Then there was basically no more room left. The Vulpine looked down briefly. Then back up at him. You planned this. Believe it or not, I didn't. Convenient. He tried adjusting his position slightly. The movement made the already cramped pod feel even tighter. Well, he said, this is officially the smallest escape pod in the galaxy. The Vulpine smirked. You humans seem surprisingly comfortable in close quarters. Years of practice surviving awkward situations. She leaned back slightly in the seat, which unfortunately pushed him closer. Her tail curled slightly around the base of the chair. You destroyed a warship, she said. Yep. You freed the most dangerous prisoner in the quadrant. Also true. And now you've trapped yourself in a tiny pod with her. The human looked at the control console. Technically, we're escaping. She studied him carefully. You risked your life for this. Risk makes life interesting. Her glowing eyes softened slightly. Why help me? The human tapped the launch controls casually. Because the galaxy needs people who cause trouble. You assume I'll cause trouble. I'm counting on it. The pod shook slightly as another explosion rolled through the cruiser outside. The launch system activated with a mechanical hum. Self-destruct in 3 minutes. The Vulpine looked out through the small forward window. Fire was spreading across the cruiser's hull. Massive sections of armor were beginning to break apart. Then she looked back at the human. You're enjoying this. A little. You're insane. Allegedly. The launch clamps disengaged with a heavy metallic thud. The pod vibrated. The Vulpine placed her hand on the ignition control. You ready? The human leaned back slightly against the narrow wall. Always. She smirked again. You know, human. Yeah? For someone who claims this was not your plan. Yes? You seem very comfortable sitting this close to me. The human glanced sideways at her. Then at the limited space around them. Well, he said calmly. I've always believed survival requires flexibility. The Vulpine laughed softly. The sound was genuine this time. Human. You're either the bravest man I've ever met. She pressed the launch control. The pod shot violently out of the cruiser. Or the most reckless. Outside the window, the massive warship began tearing itself apart. The human watched the growing fireball with quiet satisfaction. Told you, he said. I like dramatic exits. The escape pod shot away from the dying cruiser like a bullet leaving a barrel. Behind them, the massive warship twisted in space, its hull glowing with spreading lines of fire as internal explosions ripped through deck after deck. Inside the pod, the engine vibrated steadily, carrying them farther into the black. The Vulpine kept her eyes on the window. The human leaned back as much as the cramped interior allowed, which was not very much. The countdown voice from the cruiser echoed faintly over the pod's external receivers. Self-destruct in 10, 9, 8. The Vulpine watched the ship carefully. The cruiser had once been one of the Empire's most powerful war vessels. Thousands of soldiers. Enough weapons to destroy cities. Now it looked like a dying star. 3, 2, 1. The explosion swallowed the cruiser. Light burst outward in a violent sphere of plasma and shattered metal. A wave of debris expanded into space as the warship disintegrated completely. For several seconds the pod's window was filled with nothing but blinding fire. Then darkness returned. Small pieces of glowing wreckage drifted past them like dying sparks. The Vulpine exhaled slowly. You actually destroyed it. The human shrugged. Look bigger on the inside. She turned her head and studied him again. He was still calm. Still relaxed. Still sitting far too comfortably beside the most dangerous fugitive in the galaxy. That bothered her more than the explosion. You planned everything, she said. Mostly. You sabotaged the ship. Correct. You triggered the captain's self-destruct protocol. Technically, he did that himself. And then you escaped at the last second. Timing is important. Her tail shifted slightly behind the seat. Yet something doesn't make sense. The human glanced at the navigation display. What part? You. That's fair. She leaned a little closer to him. People who sacrifice themselves usually act differently. Oh? They panic. Or they become dramatic. Dramatic? Yes. Speeches. Final words. Emotional declarations. The human thought about that. Sounds exhausting. You didn't do any of that. I'm not big on speeches. Her glowing eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You were too calm. Good breathing technique. You gave away the only escape pod. That part was slightly inconvenient. Yet you never once acted like you were about to die. The human smiled faintly. Maybe I'm optimistic. The Vulpine stared at him for another long moment. Then she slowly looked around the inside of the pod again. Her eyes moved over every panel. Every control. Every seam in the metal. Then she leaned back slightly. Human. Yeah? This pod has extra wiring. The human said nothing. It also has additional fuel reserves. Still nothing. And the navigation system is far more advanced than standard emergency pods. The human kept watching the stars through the window. So, she continued calmly, either the Empire suddenly became very generous with their escape pods. She turned her head toward him. Or this was never a standard pod. The human finally looked back at her. You're very observant. You're very suspicious. He scratched the back of his head slightly. Well? Explain. The pod drifted quietly through the debris field. The human tapped a small control panel beside his knee. A hidden screen lit up. The Vulpine blinked. That was not there before. Hidden compartment. Of course it was. The screen displayed a long list of navigation coordinates, encrypted transmissions, and several blinking icons representing active systems. Her eyes widened slightly. This pod is armed. Yep. And shielded. Correct. And equipped with long-range communications. Also true. She stared at him again. You said this was the last escape pod. It was. You lied. Technically, I told the truth. Her ears tilted. How? He pointed toward the destroyed cruiser drifting behind them. That was the last pod on the ship. Meaning? This one wasn't originally on the ship. She froze for a moment, then slowly leaned closer to the control panel. You smuggled an escape pod onto a warship. Portable deployment system. You hid it inside the launch chamber. Yep. And the crew never noticed. Humans are good at hiding things. The Vulpine leaned back again and laughed. Not the dangerous mocking laugh she used earlier. This time it was genuine. You didn't sacrifice yourself? Nope. You never planned to die. Not today. You manipulated the entire situation so the crew believed there was only one escape pod left. Psychology helps. And then you let me believe you were giving up your only chance to survive. The human shrugged again. That part worked pretty well. Her tail flicked with amusement. You're incredibly dishonest. Strategically creative. She shook her head slightly. Every species in the galaxy says humans are unpredictable. Yeah, we hear that. Now I understand why. She studied him for a moment longer, then leaned back comfortably in the seat. Or as comfortably as the cramped pod allowed. You destroyed an Imperial cruiser. Technically, the captain destroyed it. You freed the galaxy's most wanted prisoner. Allegedly. And now you're flying through space alone with her. Looks that way. The Vulpine smirked slowly. You realize this was probably a terrible decision. The human glanced at the navigation screen again. Probably. You don't know where I'm going. I have a few guesses. You don't know what I'll do once I'm free. I have several guesses about that too. She leaned slightly closer to him again. You're very confident. I'm very curious. Curious about what? The human smiled. What kind of trouble you'll cause next? She laughed again. You humans are dangerous. How so? You see chaos as entertainment. Only the interesting kind. Her glowing eyes studied him carefully one more time. You know what the galaxy will say about this? What? That a human spy destroyed a warship just to free a Vulpine criminal. Sounds dramatic. They'll think you're insane. They already do. They'll assume you had some secret strategic objective. Did I? She thought about that, then slowly shook her head. No. The human leaned back again. Good. The pod continued drifting through open space, engines humming quietly. For a few minutes neither of them spoke. Finally the Vulpine broke the silence. Human. Yeah? You trapped us alone inside a very small escape pod. That seems to be the current situation. You destroyed a warship. Correct. You helped the most dangerous woman in the galaxy escape. Also correct. She tilted her head slightly. I think the galaxy is going to regret letting you survive. The human glanced toward the stars ahead of them, then smiled calmly. Relax. Why? Because if the galaxy regrets anything. He adjusted the navigation course slightly. It means things are about to get interesting. The Vulpine's tail swayed slowly behind the chair as she watched the stars stretch across the window. For the first time since her capture, she looked completely relaxed. Human. You realize this is only the beginning. The human chuckled quietly. I was hoping you'd say that.